Akshay, welcome to the Guild of Dads podcast, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
It's a,
Pleasure.
it is mine too. It is mine too. It's an incredible journey that you've been on, and I think that there is so much to kind of talk about in our conversation today. And one thing I wanted to kind of touch upon and start off with, and this is kind of jumping straight into the deep end kind of thing,
Love
but which you're probably familiar with. But
it.
one thing that I see coming up time and time again in terms of dads and in terms of men specifically is that there is two sides of kind of polarity, if you like. There is a kind of pain of kind of mediocrity that we all tend to kind of slip back into as our kind of default. And there's also this kind of pain of growth. Obviously, the pain of growth has an underlying kind of satisfaction towards it, but there is this constant kind of battle between these kind of two sides, I think, of the kind of the male psyche. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it reminds me of this quote from Jim Rohn, I believe you said, there's two kinds of pains that we all must suffer, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. One way or the other in life, we are going to suffer. And the problem I see in the world is that we are constantly running away from that reality. Not to mention, we live in a world that feeds us the opposite of that, right? Here's how to make our lives easier. We're creating, like, I was just having this conversation the other day with another podcast that was on a few days ago, and we were talking about that just because human beings can do something doesn't mean we should do something. We come out with a bunch of nonsense that absolutely has no real purpose to make our lives easier, and that is not better. So we try to do everything to avoid pain, and what that does is it creates this hidden pain that slowly, that existential pain of living an unfulfilling life that eventually rises to the surface. And we all see different ways on how that can break, right? Whether it be drugs, alcohol, binge watching Netflix, whatever it may be, we see different ways that that existential crisis breaks. So the thing is, if we seek out suffering, if we embrace the suffering of pursuing a worthy struggle is far less, far easier than the suffering that life's going to hand you anyway. I always like to say that even if you don't seek out a worthy suffering, life is going to hand you one anyway. Life's going to hand you a struggle anyway. So you might as well seek out what I call the worthy struggle, the struggle that's worthy of who you are and who you want to be, because you're going to suffer. And the thing is, the suffering of pursuing a path is more immediate. You feel the pain, right? Like if I'm writing a book or running a marathon, I feel it. If I'm binge watching Netflix, it doesn't feel like pain, right? I'm just chilling, I'm hanging out. But slowly over time that builds, and then or like let's say eating dessert, you don't feel that pain immediately. It feels good eating dessert, whatever it may be, right? The thing, all these things feel really good in the moment, but do
Yeah.
that for 1 day, 2 days, 6 months, 10 months, 10 years, and all of a sudden there's consequences to that action, and there are always consequences. The reality, sometimes the consequences don't punch us in the face till much later, but they will eventually hit us. Faster we can stay present to that, faster we can make better decisions.
Yeah, yeah, and I see that because I think there is a certain element of guys going through like this kind of soul death. I think these days where they're
Yeah,
kind of where it's not like a physical death, but they're kind of dying from the inside out. If that makes any
yeah,
sense, because there's nothing that is kind of driving them forward. There's not a kind of purpose and a kind of why and something that is giving them kind of meaning. And I see this specifically in kind of middle-aged men because they get to a point in life where they kind of feel that actually, I talk about this a lot on Guild of Dads, where guys feel like they have got all, they've got the house, they've got the car, they've got to go on nice holidays, they've got a wife and stuff, and they've got all these kind of things that society have said that should make them feel fulfilled and happy and
yeah.
settled and content and stuff. But the problem is in actual fact there's no fire in their belly at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's hard because the paradigms that society assigns us tells us how to live our lives, right? We are born kind of empty slates. The beliefs that are implanted to us are implanted from the external world, from society, our parents, school, and then they become us. But the reality is that they're not us. We think we're making choices out of free will. In Fear of Honor, I talk about the myth of free will. Like most of what we do, most of what happens in our brain, we are not choosing. That's been assigned to us through the world, through everything around us, right? That's those beliefs, those paradigms, the emotional response to external stimuli. That's just a result of subconscious forces beyond our control. So, as to your point, at some point, we're taught that this is the paradigm on how to live our life. Go to college, you get a good job, get married, get kids. And some point, something else starts to hit. And that's when it's what makes it so hard. And there's nothing about this that's easy, right? It's incredibly hard. Is you have to shatter beliefs and paradigms that you have been told your entire life. And that's hard because what we do is we attach our identity to these beliefs. So this is me. And that's the fundamental thing is we got to let go of our identity and say we are not our thoughts. We are not our feelings. We are not our experiences. We are the thinker of our thoughts, the feeler of our feelings, and the experiencer of our experiences. So there's a space between those beliefs, those thoughts, those feelings, and who we choose to be outside of it. But we get attached to that identity. People will say things like, I work with people with mental health, right? They'll say things like, I have depression, or I am depressed. Instead of saying things like, my brain goes to a state of depression from time to time, but I'm not my brain. I am not these beliefs. I am not these thoughts. And that means we have to let go of our self-identity. And that can be earth-shattering because that's everything. That's who we are, right? I mean, people fight, die, and kill for their belief systems. So the willingness to question that and say, okay, if not this, then what? And there's, again, it can be earth-shattering, but if you reframe it, it can actually be also beautiful. Because, see, I don't believe there's like people often say, find yourself. I don't believe there's an inherent self to find. There's no magical self waiting for you there, right? You got to create yourself. It's not about finding yourself. It's about creating yourself. So when you shatter and let go of the paradigms that we've been told to live, you get to start creating new ones. Start looking for new paradigms, listening to podcasts like yours, right? Coming in, listening to somebody. How can I create a new paradigm? And then you got to start systematically building that self, creating that self. And that journey is relentless, man. Relentless.
Yeah. And I think there is I think an element where people they're scared to kind of look in the mirror at themselves, and sometimes looking at other people is kind of like looking in the mirror at themselves, and they don't like what they see. And you see this when people are kind of trying to change, and people are kind of sabotaging them from that kind of change process. You know, and I've experienced this in this year specifically because I knocked. So last year I knocked drink on the head for like 30 days. So this year I was like, all right, I'm going to do it for 60 days. And then a pal of mine down in Australia who runs like a stroke support group, he said, well, why don't you do it for 90 days? So I did it for 90 days and I didn't really miss it. So I kind of carried on. And now it's actually been 6 months since I've not had a drink. But what's weird is it doesn't really bother me too much. But it's amazing how much it bothers other people. It really bothers other people. And the reason for that is that whole looking in the mirror where you're kind of looking at something else and you're actually, it's showing up yourself. It's almost like looking in a mirror to your own soul, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Oh, 100%. It reflects their own insecurity around it. Whether it be, and I've had that where like I would be in rooms where I don't drink. I don't often, rarely if ever do I eat desserts, right? So I'll be in a room with people and they'll be drinking or eating, and they're like, you know, somebody would say something like, you make us feel bad about eating dessert. And I'm like, oh, I'm not saying anything. You do you do whatever you got to do. But only the people who have their own insecurities around it will, to your point, will start to show. Like my dad, for example, drinks. He's not even close to an alcoholic, like very successful, drinks, and he doesn't care. Like he could be in a room, he doesn't care. Everybody in the room is drinking, and he doesn't want to, he won't. If everybody in the room is not drinking, he wants to, he will. He does not care because he's not insecure about it, right? But those who are feeling maybe they got a drinking problem, maybe they got a problem eating too many sweets or whatever, maybe when they see others, it's going to become a mirror to the self. And the thing is, you got to look in the mirror and you got to confront yourself. You got to say, you know what? I don't like that thing that I see in the mirror. And that's the thing that we don't do in the society, right? Everybody says, if love yourself no matter what. If you're overweight, love yourself. And this is not a weight issue, it's not a drinking issue, it's not a thing. It doesn't matter what the thing is. If you don't like something you see, don't just be like, you know what, I love myself anyway. No, man, look, I don't like this thing. Let me freaking do something about it. And I'm not saying you gotta hate yourself and berate yourself. You can separate your identity. You can say like, look, I am not that weight. I am not the drinking. I am not. That's why when I was struggling, you know my story, I was struggling with alcoholism after coming back from the war in Iraq. And I was at a point, man, drinking a bottle of vodka in a day. I had to look in the mirror and be like, dude, what are you doing with your life? And that doesn't mean I beat myself up. Doesn't mean I hate myself. I can forgive all that kind of good stuff. But the thing is, you have to confront that and not be like, you know what, I love you anyway. Like, I'll give you an example. I was at this one seminar once, and there was a kid who was a little overweight, and he didn't like it. Like, he was struggling with weight issues, right? Now, everybody was saying, okay, how can you just be like the seminar principles, the doctrine was kind of like, okay, let's just tell him he loves himself, love his image, love his self-image anyway. And I was like, what are we doing there? Like, my thing would be like, look, like, dig deep. Do you really, like, how do you feel about this? Do you want to stay this way? And then I would ask a bunch of questions, dig deep, And if not, then don't just be like, I love your body. And look, this is not a right, wrong, good, bad. If you do, own it, awesome, own it. And then own it and own it fully. If you don't just be like, look in the mirror and I love my body anyway. I don't like what I see. And let me get my ass out there and do something about it, man. But that's like, this paradigm in the world is against that, right? I mean, I'm sure somebody's hearing me and probably going to get pissed off at what I'm saying, but that's the paradigm that we live in the world is no, love yourself no matter what and whoever you are. But you don't like something what you see, you got to punch yourself, like not literally, but punch yourself in the face and be like, look, man, I'm going to do something about it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that Ed Milet uses an expression to that point. I think he uses the expression of being blissfully unsatisfied. I think it's blissfully unsatisfied is the expression he uses, which is basically like, I'm cool with where I'm at right now, but I know there's something better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
You got to be content with being discontent. Yeah,
Yeah.
Contentment and discontentment can coexist. So same thing. I'm happy where I'm at, but I'm extremely discontent all the damn time, right? Like embrace the discontentment, embrace that. Discontentment fuels drive. So yeah, I didn't know he said that, but I love that.
Yeah, and this I think talks to this whole unpackaging it. It kind of talks to the idea of like having arrived, because I think that there is this kind of idea of having arrived these days as well, rather than the kind of the journey. I talk to people about the kind of 3 pillars of Gilda's of Dads being vision plus action equals meaning, and people sort of say, well, what does that mean? And I'm like, well, first off, you start with a vision for yourself, then you take action on it, and that is where you derive your meaning. And people were like,
yeah,
well, what does that mean? So that is that is how you find meaning? I'm like, no, the meaning is in the journey. The meaning you derive is in the journey that you go on while you're working towards that kind of vision. And that meaning may well change. It may well change form. It may well change how it looks. It may well morph into something different as your kind of vision alters or it shifts ever so slightly. But I think the whole point is that you're on a perpetual journey in life. You know, you never stop learning. Absolutely. You never stop growing. You never stop finding out stuff about yourself and other people. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I 100% agree, man. Like Viktor Frankl says, man, search for meaning, you know, find meaning or Joseph Campbell has a great quote. I forget exactly how it goes, but it goes that life has no meaning. Each of us has meaning and brings it to life. It is a waste to be asking the question when you are the answer. We bring that meaning to life, and it is about the journey. I 100% agree with you about that not arriving. Like, the only arrival is death, and until then, there's more growth to be had. There's more meaning to be sought after. There's more journey to be experienced, you know? But that's another thing, man. Like, this is, again, the paradigms of society, and I'm demonizing it for a very intentional reason because I've lived through it, man. You know my story, like coming out of the war, PTSD, depression, turning that into becoming an ultra runner, entrepreneur, author. But like this paradigm of I am enough, love myself no matter what. Like the I am enough thing. Hey, look, if it gets you out the door, great. But I don't like the I am enough. What I say to myself is I am worthy. And there's a difference. I am enough implies I have arrived. I'm enough. I'm good now. You're never enough. Like but that's not a bad thing. I got trained as a life coach, right? With this ICF, International Coaching Federation organization, and their paradigm was everybody's whole and complete. Here's the thing. Now I get where it's coming from a beautiful place of love, right? Okay, got it. But when you tell people everybody's whole and complete, and they got all their stuff they're wrestling with, they're like, wait, why do I have all this stuff then? And finally, what I realized in my own healing after like battling through all this stuff was that everybody's broken, but that's not a bad thing. Like it's not that everybody's whole and complete. Everybody's got their demons. Everybody's broken. And the faster we accept that, own it, and realize it, it's a beautiful thing. Like in Japan, they have this art. There's a name for it. I forget what the name is, where they paint gold into the cracks, like on broken pottery. They paint gold. And then when they fix it, and the idea is that the gold is in the cracks. And I love that symbol. There's a name for that, but I can't remember what it is. But I love the symbolism of that. The gold is in the cracks, man. Like we all got stuck. We're all broken. Who cares? Yeah. Accept it. We're not whole and complete. We're not enough. We never will be. Great. Own it. It's not a bad thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do know what you mean. And interestingly, that I think this plays into the whole concept of kind of shaming. And I did a post on this the other day recently because I think that shaming, you know, people hear about people, you know, mum shaming, dad shaming, kid shaming, fat shaming, for every single, you know, person there is like a shaming at the minute. And the problem I think that's happened is that what people are using shaming as kind of the get out of jail free card, the one size fits all for any kind of behaviour or thing that you don't like or whatever and stuff and that. And in actual fact, there are times when people do need to be kind of called out on stuff. And I kind of made the jokey quip that, hang on a minute, I can feel that my belt feels a bit tight. I'm getting a bit of a fat bastard and I need to go out and do some exercise. So what am I self-shaming? You know, I'm aware that you know, my belt feeling tight is an indicator that I've been overindulging, so I need to go and do some exercise. Now, am I shaming myself? Not really. That's just awareness that is an indicator. You know, this piece of leather around my waist is an indicator that I'm out of shape. I know when my belt's getting tight, and that's the indicator. You know, but that's not you know, there's a fine line between this kind of shaming and kind of condoning behaviour or you know, out of line. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. Like in Marines, in Marine Corps boot camp, you know, the motivation is basically telling you what a piece of shit you are all the time, and then you stand up against it. You know, you're like, I'm gonna prove you wrong, and that has its place. They both have their place. Like sometimes, like as an example, when I motivate myself, now I'm an ultra runner, I'm pretty skinny, I don't have a lot of weight to lose. But earlier when I was training, I would look at myself in the mirror. To your point, if I saw fat, I'd be like, and let's say I'm feeling lazy or something, I would literally look at myself in the mirror and be like, all right, get your ass out of the door, you fat sack of shit. You know what I mean? And look, now I'm not saying everybody should do that. But the point is, it got me out the door. I ran, I worked hard, I trained, and now I'm an ultra runner. I do things like running 50 miles around a cul-de-sac. Now, in the Marines, that's how they motivate you. Not always, but in boot camp especially, sort of this negative motivation, right? Like berating you, calling you a piece of shit, and then you learn to take it and fight back up and say, like, prove that wrong, that mentality wrong. Now, there's a place for that darkness. Like, we all have something, like somebody who rejected us. Perhaps we were told by our parents, or somebody in life that, you know, you're going to be worthless, you're going to amount to nothing. And instead of running away from that, use that. Like, use that as fuel. There's a place to tap into the darkness of life. And there's also a place to use the positive, right? Like, celebrate yourself, acknowledge yourself, own yourself, love yourself. Like, I know I'm demonizing that, but they both have their place. It's the duality. So sometimes I'll be like, look, man, you're awesome. I acknowledge how awesome I am in going out, in running a 50 miler, running an 80 miler. Because I used to be the kind of person, if I ran 10 miles, I'd be upset I didn't run 12. If I ran 12, I'd be upset I didn't run 15. And that's a miserable way to live because you're never going to be satisfied. So they can coexist. This is like the whole ethos of Fearvana at a meta level, at a higher level, is that there's dualities in life, right? So the duality of ego and humility. People say ego is bad. Ego is not bad. If you want to be great, you have to tap into your ego. We live in a highly under-acknowledged world. We don't acknowledge each other. We sure as hell don't acknowledge ourselves. So when I'm saying look in the mirror, I'm like, yes, I was at a time where I was kind of berating myself, but I look in the mirror today and be like, look, dude, you are awesome. You did this, that, and the other thing today. I celebrate myself. I own my ego. I celebrate my greatness. And I encourage people to do the same thing. Like I learned this exercise from a mentor of mine. In his seminars, what he'll do is he'll have people sit across from each other and 2 minutes just brag about how awesome they are. And people get horribly uncomfortable doing this because we're taught ego is bad, pride is bad. And I'm not saying do this publicly, like don't be arrogant and just go tell everybody how awesome you are, but do it in the mirror, do it to your spouse, do it to your kid, like, you know, to your best friend, do it with them, like own your own greatness. And the ego can coexist with humility. So I can tap into, here's how awesome I am, and be like, you know what, I also don't know all these things. And like the best example of that are athletes. Athletes, the best athletes in the world, they have massive egos. Massive egos. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm saying that in a good way. Like they will own how great they are. Michael Jordan, known for his ego. Muhammad Ali used to say, I'm going to show you how great I am. I'm the greatest, right? But they also have the humility to be constant learners. The best athletes are always looking for that next gap. Where can I learn? How can I improve? Where am I wrong? Like, what can I learn, right? So that's the thing. We can tap into our greatness and also look for that space to keep growing, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because you know, those high performers, they're often looking for that kind of extra bit. And I think that, you know, this is something that I've been working through with a coach of mine recently, you know, because I think it's a particularly sort of Western kind of maybe Anglo-Saxon thing where we're very understated about stuff, and let's play everything down and be understated about it, and let's be modest, and let's just not kind of tell people how well they've done, and, you know, celebrate how well they've done and the wins and the things that they've achieved along the way and stuff. And so everything is kind of become, and we're also, I think many of us are still kind of quite self-deprecating it. Oh, well, you know, I did okay sort of thing and stuff, because nobody wants to feel like they're a kind of big head and they're kind of like they're braggadocious about, you know, what they've done and what they haven't done. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of, but there is enormous amount of kind of value and strength in that, because to do those great things, you almost need to kind of unleash that inner beast, that inner awesomeness.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to like own that legend within, which we all have. Every human being has that warrior spirit. So you got to own that. I mean, like all growth is ultimately two things. Find the problem, fix the problem, find what's working and do more of it. So to summarize, like kind of what we're talking about here, it's like find what's working, scale it, own your greatness, find those elements that work, your strengths, the things you're doing right, scale it, keep doing more of it, enhance it, and find the problem. And you also got to own up to that. So to what we were talking about earlier, look in the mirror and be like, you know what, this, that, the other thing, I'm awesome, I'm doing great, I'm crushing it. Where can I improve? You know what, here's where my weaknesses are, and I got to look in the mirror and confront that shit. Like I got to face myself in eye to eye and be like, you know what, you have a problem here, but you know what, you're good here. So it's not that it's one or the other. They both coexist, and we have to confront that stuff. Like that's this kind of paradox of society. We demonize ego, but on the same side, we demonize like berating ourselves. You know what I mean? We're in this the whole side. The society is all about this middle ground, like mediocrity, the mundane. We got to push to the edges, man. The edges on both, every edge. It's the duality. Go tap into ego at its highest level. Tap into humility. You know, like all of these dualities, discontentment, contentment. Tap into your contentment and own the fact that you're discontent also, you know, but you got to go into those spaces, suffering. You got to suffer, and you also got to play. You got to go through stress, and you got to recover. You know, both things, do them at the absolute extreme. The norm is the mundane, right? I'll just chill on my couch. Here's the thing. How do you push to the extreme? You go out there and suffer, and you also recover harder. Like compression boots, ice baths, all these things, you know, recover hard, suffer hard, all those things. So push the edges, and they both have their place.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you are a professional sufferer. You won't mind me saying this, will you? Because suffering is your kind of middle name, and it's kind of become what you're kind of well known for, and the kind of ultra feats of, you know, athleticism and pushing those kind of boundaries and stuff and that. Where do you feel that kind of takes you kind of mentally, you know, pushing that kind of that edge? Does your mindset go on a different journey? The only way that I've ever experienced this was I had a marathon cancelled in April, so I did a nighttime solo marathon just on the second week of lockdown. And I've spoken about this on here, and it was kind of, it's weird as you kind of get into it, and the kind of, you know, the pain's coming as you get up above sort of 20 miles, and you know, your hip flexors start to go, and then you kind of sort of talk, you know, people will find this nuts, but you start talking to yourself, and you try to keep talking yourself around and stuff and that. You know, Goggins talks about this, and I'm sure that but you know, when you're going up into the realms of 50 plus, 100 plus, and doing these very, very hard things, where does your kind of mind take you on that journey, Akshay?
Like everywhere, and that's why I love it. Like, running these long distances it's like a microcosm for life. You get to experience these intense highs and these intense lows and everything in between. So like a few weeks ago during the quarantine, I ran 50 miles around a cul-de-sac. So just going around and around, it was about like 1,000 laps plus. I mean, a 0.05 mile loop, you know, just going over and over again. When you're doing that, I had moments where I'm just like, and I did it all night. So there was added element of sleep deprivation and the solitude, the darkness, that loneliness, all of that I had to confront, right? And you're going around this damn loop over and over and over again. So your mind goes kinds of places. So there's moments where I wasn't talking too out loud because I'm in a little neighborhood, but like whispering out loud to myself that, you know, you're the baddest motherfucker in the world, like owning up to who the hell does this shit. You're awesome. And then other moments where I'm hitting the pain, right? And and then I'm like, there's other moments where I'm calling forth the pain. Like early, I remember 4 or 5 hours into the run, I'm coasting. And I'm just like, bringing the pain, like bring it. Like what I like to say is like, call forth the devil. Sometimes this is how I phrase it, is pray for the devil himself to rise out of hell and give everything he has to attempt the destruction of your soul. So that when he does, you can look the devil in the eye and bury him in his own blood. Like that's how I talk. Like, come on, bring it. Bring the pain. Call forth that suffering. Bring out whatever you want, because nothing is going to break me. I'm waiting for the pain to hit. And when it does hit, I'm like, yes, there's moments where I'm like, shit, I wish I didn't wait for that pain. But I wish I didn't call for that pain. But almost always, like when the pain hits, I'm like, this is why you did this. You're not running 50 miles around a cul-de-sac if you're expecting easy. You know what I mean? You know you're gonna suffer. So when that pain hits, I'm like, this is what it's about. Because you train to transcend that pain. Why you suffer is because suffering is a training ground for self-transcendence. And if there was one thing, like when somebody asked me once, what is life about? to me, there's no right answer, of course. To me, life is about self-transcendence. And not just self-transcendence for others, but self-transcendence for others, for a mission, doing something purposeful, like hosting your podcast, helping people, helping other dads, like what you're doing, but even self-transcendence for yourself, like transcending your own feelings, transcending your own thoughts, so you can not get caught up in the hedonistic experiencing self that just wants pleasure and feeling good in the moment. You transcend that for the mission. And suffering teaches you how to transcend. So my mind goes like everywhere, man. I have this self-dialogue myself. I think about life. I think about my business. I think about, the existential, everything, because you're running for hours on end with nowhere to go. So you go through those highs, you go through those lows, you go through moments where there is no time and you're just in the pure isness of that experience, which is a deeply spiritual experience. And then that disappears and the pain suddenly hits again, and you're like, you know what I mean? You're going through this roller coaster. But I love the roller coaster, man. Like, that's what life is. Life is a roller coaster. So long distance running is a microcosm for life.
And do you listen? And this is going to sound like a silly question, but it's not, because I'm going to take this somewhere after I ask this question. Do you have? Do you ever listen to music, or do you have earphones on when you're running, or do you go au naturel?
Sometimes I do. Most of the time I don't. So when I do shorter runs, I might. Like chill, like if I'm like training runs, I might just like sometimes I'll have, just chill out, have some fun, whatever. And this actually was an exercise in learning. Like every run before this used to be an exercise in suffering until I explored the duality, right? The duality, suffering, the other extremes play. I used to be like, I'll give you an example. I once saw this, I was on a run and I saw this sign that said 5K fun run. And I had this visceral disgust, like, you don't run for fun, like disgust at the idea of a fun run, which is absurd, right? You can also run for fun. So I kind of was pushing the suffering line so far that I was like bringing suffering into every area of my life almost unnecessarily. And it was kind of miserable. And so subconsciously, I'm like, all right, let me explore the other edge of the duality. So, let me have some fun. So sometimes I'll listen to music. But when I'm doing like the long runs, the ultras, most of the time it's no music. Almost always it's no music, no anything. It's just me and my mind.
So there's a meditative quality to it by the sounds of things. Because I know that... I know that Michael A. Singer talks about this kind of, this thought machine on your shoulder that's kind of chattering at you, and it kind of feeds into that whole idea of having that kind of voice that's constantly kind of chattering at you, and you've got to find your kind of way through. And I think it may have been him or someone else talks a bit about like a kind of river of thought, and you've almost got to kind of watch those thoughts going along the river, but not get involved with them and not just leave them be. And kind of that kind of thought acceptance. And I think that there is a lot of value. When I've spoke to quite a few people on the podcast that kind of about mental health, and I think relationship with thought is so much is kind of at the base of this whole conversation around kind of mental health, and at that relationship with thought, I think.
Absolutely. And to your point, there's two different styles and kinds of meditation. More often than not, we only talk about the one, which is like let your thoughts flow away. Both have their place. Both are incredibly valuable. So the one is let your thoughts flow away. The other one is actually not letting your thoughts flow away and just letting them go where they go and being with them. So sometimes when I meditate, a thought will show, and I'll just say like my mantra. Everybody has different mantras or different things they visualize. Some people will visualize like a thought on a cloud floating away, or like one of my friends will visualize a whiteboard and the thought like being erased on a board, or like a thought going into a boat and floating away on a river. So there's one kind where you my mantra is bring it back. So I'll just say bring it back. They bring it back to the stillness, But the other kind of meditation, which has its place too, which is not as often talked about, is actually just being with the chaos of consciousness and not working on silencing the mind, but just actually letting the chaos reign supreme and see what that does and see where it takes you. So when I spent 7 days, I don't know if you know or not, but I spent 7 days in a darkness retreat where I was in pitch darkness, silence, and isolation. You have nothing to do there, right? You're in 7 days of darkness. So basically, I did a lot of those two kinds of meditation, being with the chaos of my mind, other times just finding silence. And both are immensely valuable. You will find some great lessons in all of it.
Yeah. And there's one thing I wanted to ask you about that, because I've heard you talk about before about the fact that after, I think it was 3 or 4 days, your mind begins to your brain starts to manufacture the same chemicals that are used in ayahuasca ceremonies. And
Yeah, DMT. Yeah.
that's it, yeah, DMT. And one thing that I found quite interesting around the ayahuasca ceremonies specifically is the amount of people that have had like addiction problems, be it drugs or alcohol, whatever, and they'll go and do their like an ayahuasca ceremony, and I'm like, is that treading on fragile ground,
Yeah.
coming from that background? And it's just interesting that you kind of in that dark in the dark room therapy, that you induced that state without actually medicating it, if that makes any sense. It wasn't artificial.
Absolutely.
It was naturally created through the
Yeah.
circumstances of being in that darkened place.
Yeah, that's my fear with doing these psychedelic healing. I mean, I know people who have cured addiction from doing psychedelic healing. So they've said it's actually cured their addiction because it's brought up their trauma, allowed them to process the trauma and heal. But on the flip side, and I've also heard these stories, which they don't talk about as much, but I've also heard the stories of like, because when you're going into psychedelic healing, you're basically inducing bliss to some degree. Again, I know I haven't done ayahuasca, but I know it can be pretty intense, like the throwing up and all that kind of stuff. But if you're doing an MDMA, you're inducing bliss, and that can become addictive if you're not careful, you know? Whereas like going into darkness, it's not a shortcut to those states. You have to earn the right to go into those states. You're not popping a pill or something like that to go into those states. You're spending 7 days in darkness to go experience those states where you're seeing light shows and having these hallucinogenic experience, like literally hallucinogenic experiences. And but like it's you have to suffer to earn that right to experience that, you know? Like it was not until I think it was 5 days in the darkness, 4 or 5 days, where I had this, like the brightest white light I've ever seen in my life. Like bright white light. I mean, I literally was touching my eyelids, thinking, are my eyes closed or my eyes open? I thought I needed an eye mask to sleep. I was trying to cover my eyes, but I'm in a pitch dark room, and the brightest light I've ever seen. So you have these wild experiences, but you have to earn them by spending 4 or 5 days in darkness to get there, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Like, I mean, I'm not knocking the ayahuasca by any stretch of the imagination. I've not done it. I have no place to knock it. But it is. Like my concern for the same very reasons that it's flirting in dangerous territory, in my opinion. Now, again, I know a lot of people who've done it and they've come out like way better off. So
yeah,
I don't know enough to talk, but I do think there's just one last point is that we got it, and it reflects a culture of seeking shortcut. Like we're trying to find shortcuts even now to enlightenment. You know what I mean? And we got to be careful of that. I think right now it has its place, but like anything, we as human beings, we don't know what we're doing. We're kind of idiots sometimes. Like we think what we're doing is going to lead to our collective progress, but in many ways we're making our lives worse. So while the ayahuasca and the psychedelic healing is relatively new, it's definitely picking up much more mainstream, but it's still kind of in the underground. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, most people I talk to, how helpful it's been, but if we're not careful, all we're doing is now seeking a shortcut to enlightenment. So we're saying, let me just pop a pill instead of go spend 7 days in darkness. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I do know what you mean, because I read a book a couple of years ago called "Teach Us to Sit Still" by a guy called Tim something or other, and he described his process of going. He was getting chronic abdominal pain, and his story was that he got into Vipassana meditation, and he kind of worked his way up from sort of 5 minutes up to kind of 45 minutes, an hour, and to the point he could like meditate for a couple of hours at a time. And in my mind, if you were to go into a dark room, you would want to be probably a pretty experienced meditator to be able to kind of handle what that is going to throw up in the, particularly in the latter kind of stages. But the idea that you wouldn't be, to not be a meditator or not have at least an idea of what is in store, and then go and take a plant medicine and induce that state immediately, that to me, I could understand why that would be a frightening experience for some people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like inducing labour. It's like having your if you're a lady having your labour induced. It doesn't come about kind of naturally, gradually. All of a sudden, bang, you're in full blown labour when you're induced. You know what I mean? So
no, for sure. Again, I think it could potentially have its value, but we got to be careful about looking for shortcuts in every context of our life, which is what we tend to do. Because why we do it? Because the other option is we have to go suffer for it. And the nature of suffering is that it sucks. Sitting in a dark room for 7 days was not easy. It was extremely challenging. Like even when I go on long runs, like when I'm 3 hours into a run and no pain, right? Like that pain when you finish a run and you limp, and I limp back, and like when I finish 50 miles around the cul-de-sac, when I limp back into my apartment with my pain, like that is magnificent. The reward of that, I've had other runs where I ran across Barbados and I was heat exhaustion, throwing up and like ready to throw up in the toilet, about to throw up, my body fully cramping up, and it was magnificent, like smiling as I'm going through the pain. But here's the thing: I had to earn the right to go through that pain. Like every long run, I'm limping for a good day, sometimes more after that, and I love it. But I had to earn it. Like there's virtue in that pain because I earned it. Like, and I've experienced the opposite of that when I was in college and I mean not in college, in high school, stuck with like battling drug addiction. I used to cut myself. I still have scars on my arm from cutting myself, burning myself, and there's no virtue in that pain. And I didn't know this. I was by not even remotely self-aware. I was doing it for multiple other reasons, just very self-destructive lifestyle. But now when I look at it, you realize there's a kind of purity to pain. There's a lure to pain. There's a purity to it that's powerful. And now I do it in a positive way, right? Like running ultras, I climb mountains in the Himalayas, skiing across polar ice caps, all these things. And writing a book was an exercise in suffering, building a business. All these things are not easy, but there's virtue to it, and it's earned pain. Like you have to work for it. And I think we hesitate to do that, generally speaking. Of course, there are those who don't, but generally human beings do because naturally our brain is lazy. Like Dr. Daniel Kahneman, he's a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, wrote this great book. Sounds like you're familiar, Thinking Fast and Slow. He says, the natural state of the brain is laziness. So we will retreat to the easiest course of action. So we have to combat that and being like, look, I'm going to go out there. I mean, it's not rational to go run 50 miles around a cul-de-sac. It's freaking, you know what I mean? Like it's stupid. Who the hell would do that? So you've got to fight like the normalcy and rationality to go do the insane, because it's in the insane that you'll find new awakenings.
Yeah, I reckon I did about a half a mile around the cul-de-sac, and that was hard enough at the end of 26.2 miles because I was trying to make up the last few bits on the distance, and I kept coming up to my house and it was like 24.5. I was like, oh, right, run to the end, run back, run, and I was like, I don't want to do another big loop. I'm just going to keep doing these small loops until I just make it up. And then all of a sudden, my Garmin just popped into life, and all the streamers and stuff come out, and it's like go on. I was like, right, I'm just going to walk back, and it was like dark at night, and I was like, this isn't kind of quite the finish line that I had in mind with the crowd screaming and whatever exactly. And stuff. So I crept upstairs to my bed with an apple and a cheese roll, I think it was,
Nicely done though, yeah.
But it's interesting what you say about the kind of like earning it as well, because I remember like a little while back there was I saw on social media that Russell Brand had made a comment about something, and a few people have chimed in and said, well, his opinion isn't worth jack because he is an addict, basically. And I think I had a bit of an insight when I saw these kind of comments, and I thought, well, actually, having interviewed quite a few people that have had issues with either drugs or alcohol, whatever it may be, I think that sometimes that going down that kind of pathway opens the doors to having to face yourself in a way that a non-addict would not have to, and whilst it's a painful experience to have to get to that realization, I think there's a lot of value in that, because I don't think that people should, let's say non-addicts, if you can call anyone a non-addict, because I think in this day and age, most people have got a habit or a dependency, or there's something. Most people have got something that is, even if it's been addicted to chocolate or having a bad chocolate habit. But I think there's a lot of value in that, having been able to have that discussion with people that have walked that walk, because they've faced down that, they've looked in the mirror in a way that the other people haven't. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, to get out of my addiction, you have to confront some dark stuff within yourself. You have to go face that stuff. I think, like I said, man, I've had a point in my life where I would be throwing up in a toilet after 4 days of drinking a liter of vodka a day. And I would see the bottle of vodka would be sitting on my shelf. I would throw up. As soon as I'm done, I would pick up and drink again. That is dark. That's horrific. And then the withdrawals you go through when that's done. And having to confront that was valuable. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, I'm not condoning like everybody should go into that space to find the lessons. Obviously, I'm not saying that. But I think to then say that, oh, his opinion means jack because he's an addict is absurd. Like, he's experienced life, and we all have. Like, I would never condone that to anybody, but I don't regret it because in all of those journeys, the collective suffering that I've experienced, the collective growth that I've experienced, have made me into who I am, have led to my work, what I do now with Fear of Honor and helping other people navigate their own demons. So, and and to this day, like some people say to me now, you're just like when they hear about running ultras, I've had people say, oh, you're just replacing one addiction with another, as if like they say that as if it's a negative. And I'm like, yeah, I am, and I'm not unaware of that. There's nothing negative about it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Having a healthy obsession is beautiful. Look at anybody who's the best in the world at what they do. They are addicted to it. They're obsessed at it. You look at the Kobe Bryants, the Michael Jordan. Those men lived it. They breathed it. They slept it. They were addicted to it. They were obsessed with it. And to anybody who says that's like, oh, that's wrong. No, man, like that's beautiful. I mean, yes, you balance that with recovery. Like there are people who take it too far and they don't, we know people who are successful, quote unquote, in business and they're not living fulfilled lives or overweight, whatever. But like people like Kobe still had a family life, took care of his kids. There's a lot of stories of how he would go to his daughter's game and then fly to his next game or whatever, So we all got to find our line. It's that duality, you balance the stress with the recovery. But yeah, man, like channeling addiction in a healthy way is tremendously powerful. I realize my addictive personality is never going to go away. And it's not like everybody has to have this. My dad, for example, is a very chill dude, very zen-like, he doesn't experience, not highs and lows like I do, super chill. He's been incredibly successful, 27 years, 3M, ran 3 in India, made a lot of money, started off at nothing, that kind of thing, very successful. But like, he's very chill. He's a 180 from me. Now, I've realized that I'm just not going to be that way. Like, to this day, I experience intense lows and I experience intense highs. But now I just own it. I've learned to embrace the addiction. Like I always kind of say it like jokingly, but to be honest with you, there's a truth. I'm either going to end up dead in a ditch on alcohol or drugs, or I'm going to do great things and help change the world. There's nothing in the middle ground for me. That's the only two options for me. So hopefully now I'm working towards that other option, the more positive one.
Yeah. It's kind of feeding the right wolf, isn't it? I've heard that expression before. It's feeding the right wolf, and you have that kind of. Yeah, I think I can kind of sort of relate to this. I'm not saying that I'm doing ultra running the same way as you, but I had a conversation. I have a coach and mentors and stuff, and I had two people say to me last week, you need to kind of back off and balance things out a little bit at the minute because you're sailing too close to the wind. And I think sometimes you need to have people around you that, not to say that you can't do the things that you want to do and do, incredible things and stuff and that. But sometimes you need to have like that. You almost need to kind of have that little counterbalance where you've got someone saying, not, look, you can't do what you want to do, but in actual fact, actually, for your sanity at this moment in times, I can see some little signs appearing. Just rein that in just a little bit, and it's that edge. People talk about that edge where you're beginning to kind of find your edge. It could be physically, it could be mentally, and it's knowing where that kind of edge is and when you can kind of push it and when you need to kind of dial back from it just a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to find that within yourself. And if you're going to get mentors who are pushing those edges, because that's the other thing, right? In the world of now, life coaches, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is a life coach. It doesn't take much to pay $50 and get a life coach certification. Is like, if you're gonna follow somebody, get a mentor, make sure they're on that path and striving themselves, because otherwise they're feeding their bullshit onto you. They're feeding their paradigms onto you. They're feeding their belief systems onto you, and you got to be careful about that. Like, if you're gonna have somebody feed their belief systems onto you, you better be damn sure that they are striving at the highest level. If that's your path. Like, I'm not saying everybody wants to be a Kobe and be the best in the world, because being that level, like pursuing mastery at that level, comes with a lot of sacrifices, a lot of pain. You're confronting a lot of darkness. It's not for everybody. And this is not a right, wrong, good, bad. There is no right, wrong. Ultimately, it's all a battle for our chemicals, right? Neurochemicals in the brain. Are we pursuing our meaning? Are we pursuing our path to fullest? That's what matters. And whatever your path is, find somebody who's on that path. Like, I am not for everybody. Like, people who work with me, I know I'm not for everybody. I know that very, very clearly. You can hear how I talk. I've had people get my programs and be like, look, dude, you're way too intense for me. I'm like, no doubt. I wish you all the best, sending you lots of love, but I get it. I'm not for everybody. David Goggins, and he's not for everybody, but there are those who follow him to the T. Obviously, I relate to David Goggins very much so, right? Like, I love that guy. His stuff is right aligned with me. Very similar stories, very similar journey. But like, yeah, so you gotta find if you're gonna find a mentor, make sure they're on your path and have like practicing it, not just paid for a certification. You know what I mean? And not
Mm.
demonizing those who have. To be very clear, I'm not demonizing it. But if you're gonna get that certification, make sure you're living that path, like at the highest level.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, because the thing is there are a lot of people right now who are kind of talking the talk without kind of walking the walk. I would say
Absolutely.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. What are your thoughts on kind of meaning? Because you've mentioned Viktor Frankl's book. It's a massive influence on me. I
Yeah.
mention it a lot.
Yeah.
And at the minute, funny enough, I'm reading his second book. I think it's Man's Search for Meaning. It's the book after the kind of main book.
Mm.
So I'm halfway through that. It's heavy gut. It's even for me. It's one of those books where you kind of you need to read a page or 2 pages, kind of let the kind of stuff trickle into your head before you
Yeah.
kind of move on,
Yeah.
because it's quite hard. Some of it's kind of quite
Yeah.
deep and stuff. But what are your kind of thoughts around the whole kind of issue of meaning as it kind of pertains to the lives of men and the lives of dads and in particular?
I think to our point earlier is that you have to cultivate meaning. Meaning
Mm.
is not, in my take on it, is that there's no inherent self to find. Now, some people have a different paradigm of the world, right? If you believe, let's say, in reincarnation, which I'm originally from India, in Indian culture, we believe in that. Then there's obviously, if you're operating from the world from that paradigm, then obviously there is an inherent self to find because my soul was reincarnated, right? So there's a being there. I don't now. So whatever paradigms you all operate, there's no right, wrong, good, or bad about it. But I believe that nonetheless, even if you do operate from, let's say, a paradigm that there's sort of an inherent self, like you still got to create that meaning. You still got to get out there every single day and create something. You got to create who you want to be every single day, every single moment. So you got to fight for that, and you got to create meanings to things. Like, look, we're meaning-seeking creatures anyway. There's a
Mm.
lot of research I talk about in my book Fearvana, like about how when even people who were like who had a damage between their left and right brain connection, and there was no way because of that damage, like there was no logical way they could have answered certain questions. I can't remember the exact study, so I'm kind of butchering it, but basically because there was a physical flaw in their brain, not like a damage in their brain, they couldn't answer it, but yet they would answer a question with a certain thing because we're always meaning seeking creatures. We would find meanings to things even when there isn't one inherently there, or we're not like wired to it. So we're
Mm.
always creating meanings anyway. So we might as well become more conscious of those meanings. And the meanings we create to life shape our destiny. And even to like, especially the meanings we create to our emotions, to our experiences. Like as an example, now when I came back from the war, I lost a friend to the war, and I struggled with survivor's guilt for a long time. Everybody told me don't feel guilty.
Mm.
Rationally, I get it, right? You can't control what happens in war. People die, you can't control that. Emotionally, it didn't change the fact that the guilt wasn't going away. Now, what I realized in my own healing as I delved into the research of neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, was that the problem was not the guilt. The problem was the meaning I had made the guilt. Like what I made that guilt
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah.
Everybody said made the guilt go away. So I'm trying to fight this thing to make the guilt. Oh, guilt is bad. That's what I made it mean, right? Guilt is, and how many people hear guilt is a negative emotion, quote unquote? It's not a negative emotion. It's an emotion. It's an expression of love if you choose to view it that way. The reason I felt survivor's guilt was because I loved my brother. I love my buddy. I mean, it's not just veterans who feel it. A lot of people, when they lose somebody, right, they feel why them instead of me. So
Mm.
guilt is an expression of love. So I just reframed it. By reframing the meaning to it, I created a new meaning, and I actually had a poster of my friend up on my wall that I lost, that I lost in the war, and it said, "This should have been you. Earn this life. Earn it."
Mm.
And that guilt drove me forward. So you create meanings to experiences, you create meanings to emotions, you create meanings to your thoughts, because a lot of that stuff we don't control. We don't control most of our emotions. Like right now, I'm sitting in this room. Somebody comes in here with a gun and points a gun at me. I'm not going to choose to feel fear. I'm not going to pause and say, let me feel afraid. My brain's going to respond with fear. That's the
Yeah.
normal human response. The fear is not the problem. It's what I do with the fear that matters. There are no bad or good emotions. They're only emotions. It's up to us to decide what we do with them. Fear is never the problem. It's the meanings we create around the fear. It's what we do with the fear that matters. So the meanings we create are everything. And we got to become more conscious of it because we're going to create it anyway. And if you're not conscious of it, the world around you is creating those meanings by planting the belief systems, planting the paradigms, planting the mental models into you. The world around you has done that for you. So you better be damn sure you're going to take charge, understand what the world has implanted into you, and then create meanings accordingly that are actually going to serve you.
Mm. Yeah. And it sounds from what you've been saying, what we've discussed previously in this discussion, is cultivating the awareness that you can be able to kind of catch that whilst it's in midair and assign the meaning to it before your lens catches it and assigns the meaning for you. Does that sound
Yeah,
about right? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's like this constant practice of self-awareness. So going meta. Meta, and the word meta means rising above the thing to look at the thing. So like meta learning is learning how to learn. Meta awareness is being aware of your awareness. So I have like a note on my phone that says relentlessly think in the meta. So constantly rising above. Okay, what is this thing? What's my awareness? How? And I mean, a simple practice is the next time you're standing in line in a coffee shop, ask yourself, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? Instead of just getting caught up in your thoughts, go meta. What am I thinking? All you're doing is now becoming aware of your thoughts, aware of your feelings. What that does is it trains you. It trains you to become aware so you can choose outside of it and then create new meanings to it, right? And I mean, it's like Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space between stimulus and response is everything. And I don't just mean external stimulus. The internal stimulus we don't control either, like our thoughts and our feelings. That internal stimulus and the conscious choice, the meaning around it, that's our point of power.
Yeah, and Buddhists call this the kind of the observing self, don't they? That's watching what's going on all the time.
Exactly.
And I think I like that because it kind of gives this, it gives you like an alternative seat that you can sit in. And if people are kind of finding this hard to get their head around what Akshay and me are talking about, the Buddhists talk about the kind of observing self. You're sitting in your seat of awareness, and you're watching what's going on, almost like a Roman emperor sitting in the kind of royal box in an amphitheater, watching everything that's going on, watching the centurions come in, and watching the crowds go wild. You're observing what's going on rather than actually sitting in the crowd. You're observing from a kind of higher plane. I think that's a fair way of saying it. Would that be about right, Akshay?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, the being the observer, right? And that's why like a simple practice is just asking yourself, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? And so you're not getting caught up in the thought. You're saying, okay, I'm thinking these things. Do these things matter? Do these things? Because the thoughts, we don't, like most of these thoughts are just responses. Like we don't have, like let's say I'm driving and in a moment of road rage, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to kill that guy. I have that thought. Does that mean I'm actually going to kill that person? Does that mean I'm a murderer? That thought is not me, right? That's not who I am. But we get attached to our thoughts. We make those thoughts our identity. To become an observer is to say, okay, I had a thought saying I'm going to kill that guy. Cool. My brain just responded that way. That's not who I am. Who do I want to be instead? Now, in that case, you choose and I'm going to continue driving and be calm. But like in every context, you rise above the thought and recognize that that's not an identity. That's not who I am. I'm just going to choose separately. And then you notice it and then keep deciding and constantly deciding. Keep making that choice. Yeah.
And I think the thing is as well is when people are kind of suffering from maybe like anxiety or depression or anything along these lines, it kind of throws things out of kilter a little bit. So you become more sensitive to kind of racing thoughts and rumination, all this kind of stuff, and going back to what we were talking about, meaning, you begin to kind of attach meaning to things like quite impulsively, and you take the thoughts really literally, and you lose that awareness and that kind of that thought wisdom, I think is the word. You don't have the wisdom. You temporarily lose that wisdom to actually see a thought for what it is. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so becoming aware of that, and I've worked with people who have anxiety disorder, PTSD, depression, and the biggest problem again is where they're getting so attached to that identity of who they are. Like I worked with this one guy who had anxiety disorder. Every time he sat down on his computer to write, and what we did, every other therapist was trying to help him get rid of the anxiety. Ken and me, and my first response was, we're not going to get rid of the anxiety, because his brain had learned to say sitting down to write equals anxiety. That was no longer a choice. What we had to do is separate ourselves, not from the sitting on the computer, but from the anxiety. And be like, instead of beating himself up, the problem was he would feel anxiety every time he sat on the computer to write, and then he'd beat himself up. Like, what's wrong with me? I'm pathetic. I'm worthless. I'm a piece of shit. All that dialogue, right? And what we were working to let go is of that, not to fight the anxiety. Let go of that judgment around the anxiety. And by doing that, like in the book, I have this 5-step process, LMNOP, where you label meaning. N is it's not me, it's my brain opting for a new meaning, and then taking action in line with purpose. That's why LMNOP. I go deeper into that. But like I worked him through this process, and ultimately we could rewire the brain. So in time, the anxiety goes away, but that's not the initial goal. It's just to create a new meaning around it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is interesting. You talk about legacy and legend And I wanted to ask you about that because again, that plays really nicely into what we've been talking about, and I think kind of frames this conversation really well. The concept of legacy and legend. What you want your legacy to be in the world, and for sure we've delved into the concept of legend indirectly today, I think.
Yeah. So the way I talk about it is in a little tool. I have this little notebook that I keep with me everywhere. I call it my spirit armory. And inside there, I write my legacy and my legend. So the legacy is all the things I've already done. So what is a legacy I've left? Because that's when you tap into your ego, right? So sometimes I say business is not going the way I want it to be, or I'm feeling a little low. I'm not getting the results I want. I mean, that's life. Nothing's a smooth ride up, right? So I can look at my legacy list and be like, look, dude, you have already done all this shit. You are badass. Like, oh, and how great you are. And my legacy list, everybody, that's why I recommend everybody do this. Write down, what are all the successes you've achieved? What are all the struggles you've overcome? Like, write that down on this list. And that's your legacy list. And that you keep building on. So when I do new things like running 50 miles, I add that. Now that's a new thing to my legacy list. And the legend list is a list of characteristics, virtues, and ideals of who I want to be. Who is Akshay at his most legendary? So everybody has, like, nobody's perfect, right? Now, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But I believe there's value in striving for perfection. Another thing that's demonized is perfection is bad. Perfection is not bad. Vince Lombardi, one of the greatest coaches of all time, he used to tell his team, gentlemen, we will chase perfection and chase perfection relentlessly, knowing that we will never attain it. But in the process, we will catch excellence. So striving for perfection is not a bad thing. So if I was perfect, if Akshay was perfect, if it was the legend of Akshay, who would he be? And so I write down characteristics, I write down virtues. What are the ideals of legendary Akshay? And if I feel myself not being that, the value in having these lists is I can look in this and be like, all right, would legend Akshay do this? Probably not. You know what? Let me step outside of this present self. Let me step outside of this current way of being and transcend it, coming back to self-transcendence, to step into my legend self, to step into my legendary self. So stepping into who is you at your most legendary. And if you look at superheroes, right, like there are legends, right, that these myths that form around them. And of course, there's not just superheroes, but like Achilles and all these stories from history, right, legends that form. And these beings are shaped into this ideal, and we can shape that into ourselves. Like my list of virtues are going to be different than yours, and different than every other person. So there's no right or wrong here. Create your own list of virtues of who do you want to be at your most legendary. And then when you're not being that, so I have this little book, like here, I'll grab it. It's right here. I have it with me all the time. And I keep this with me. So all the time. So like, let's say I'm going out with my family, right? Like I'm walking over to the restroom or something. I'll open it up and pull over and read something, like read a little note, read a little statement to remind me of who I want to be. And I'm constantly putting that in my consciousness 24/7 to step into that being. I'm not perfect at it. I go through my falls, but I'm better and better. I'm sure as hell a lot better than I used to be.
Yeah, and I like that concept of legend because it's really it's very similar to something that Todd Herman talks about in the alter ego effect, where kind of like he uses the example I think of Beyonce and a few other high performers where they jump into that kind of like that alter ego. Yeah. When they want to operate at their best in their chosen kind of field of play, and I think there's going to be more discussions on that. I think it's people are beginning. I know high performance sports people and performers have really tapped into it, and I think
absolutely. Likewise, I call it. I haven't read. I know of Todd Herman his work, but I haven't read that book. But I have this exercise that I call the superhero identity map. Yeah. How do you because we all have different masks, right? Like if I'm not a father, but let's say I'm playing with my kids or my little cousin or something. Who I need to be then is very different than who I need to be when I'm running an ultra. You know what I mean? So you have to learn to put on that mask and activate a different being in different contexts. And it's not, so people kind of think that's something wrong with that, like as if you're like a multiple personality disorder. It's like, no, like we all have different selves. The key thing is you want to step into each self consciously. Do it with purpose. So if I'm being in a role of hanging out with little cousins, that requires a different way of being than if I'm running an ultra, than if I'm building a business, than if I need to shut off and recover and go to sleep. I can't be wired the way I am from I can't be in an intense mode. I need to be in a chill, right? So you have different masks that you put on, and this whole exercise that they teach is like about how do you put on the mask, how do you consciously step into the mask at will. It sounds like very similar to Todd's book. I haven't read his book, but it sounds like it's something similar.
Yeah, and I can, and again, using the example of running, I think you do when you get up to above a certain mileage, well, for me anyway, I find that you begin to take on that kind of warrior. For me, it's like a warrior. You're beginning to kind of go to war sort of thing, and it becomes like right, I'm getting ready for the battle sort of thing and stuff. And the early miles are a precursor to the next bit. You know what I mean? And you could have that with. You could have that with speaking. You could have that with any particular kind of field of play that you want to show up in a certain kind of way.
Yeah,
I love it. I do love it. Akshay, it's been a wicked conversation today, and there's a ton of stuff. It's just such a pleasure speaking to you because there's just such a ton of stuff to kind of go through, and there's so many good nuggets for anyone kind of looking to kind of get into this. For people that are looking to find out a bit more about you, what you do, what you've got coming up, where is the best places to do so, my friend?
You find me at fearvana.com. That's FEARVANA, fearvana.com. And then the book is available on Amazon in Kindle, Audible, and paperback. 100% of the profits from the book go to charity, so we support some really beautiful causes. And you can find me there.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask you one last question, which I don't prime any of the guests that come on here for, but it won't come as any surprise to you. What is it that gives you meaning in life, sir?
Love it. What gives me meaning is self-transcendence. So my mission statement is to inspire, empower, and train my human family to transcend suffering in order to live their own personal legend. So my meaning is helping others cultivate legend within themselves.
Excellent. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And it comes across in the work that you do. Definitely, sir.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
Listen, I want to thank you very much for coming on and speaking to me today. It's been a pleasure, like I say. I wish you all the best on your next endeavours and your next transcendent experience that you are going to have. And thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thanks a lot. Cheers, Akshay.